Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from week 4. Definitely a lot that didn't have a chance to get to, but tons that we could get into throughout the next couple of weeks, and we definitely will. But let's get into all the questions coming out of week 4 because I got a lot of them. I think there's a number of different things to break down from this week, and the way I want to start is just what can we take out of this week? What can we learn from this week and feel good about going forward? Because it's still that part of the season where you're not really sure what you're seeing. You feel pretty good about some teams. You feel pretty good about Texas. You feel pretty good about even Tennessee at this moment. You feel pretty good about a lot of these teams. There's still another shoe that could drop, hypothetically. There's still some things that could go wrong, and I think Tennessee kind of proved the most this weekend. I think they're a team that, frankly, was dancing around the CFP title odds for quite some time, and I think really proved who they are on Saturday. I think there's still a ton of big-time tests ahead of them, and plenty that are going to be harder than OU, but the way they proved that they are going to walk into someone else's building, win with defense rather than offense, and go about their business that way, I think proved exactly what I expected from this team. And I think it's that they're a title contender. I think Utah is another team that we could talk about. Definitely did some incredible things this past weekend. And then you have a Michigan team that obviously got back in on the conversation. They played really, really good football. And think overall, what I took away from this week for USC and for Michigan is that they're teams that are going to have to be worried about. I think USC obviously missed the mark a little bit. They are much more physical, much more dominating on defense than they ever have been. For Michigan, you just found out who you are. You found out exactly who you are on that offensive side of the ball, and at the end of the day, people are going to have to stop it. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, as USC showed us this weekend. So I think it's one of those things that you could have big time worries about some teams. I think OU is probably the one that you're most worried about as of right now, but a ton of teams proved a lot to me in the good direction. I think Illinois is one of the big time teams to talk about. They did incredible things against Nebraska, and you look at the rest of that schedule, they could make some really incredible things happen the rest of the year. So I think it's one of those weeks where you can take what you want out of it, right? You can take that Tennessee is a title contender and OU is not all that bad. You can take that OU's offensive line is going to be an absolute nightmare the rest of the season, and they're not going to be able to make a run. And then there's a number of different ways to go with it. I think overall, what I took away is Tennessee is a contender. Utah is very, very real as long as they can get Cam Rising back for the back end of that season. And then Illinois is a team that you're at least going to have to worry about going forward. The other thing I want to talk about is, did this weekend kind of illustrate the worries of the portal, particularly around the quarterback position? Because we had two very good examples of teams that, I don't want to say pushed a quarterback out of the system, but definitely favored the other guy, favored the next guy over the one that they had at the time, and Oklahoma's probably the best example. They had Jackson Arnold in the wings, and frankly, I do not blame them for thinking this kid was going to be incredible. He has a ton of arm strength, is one of those guys that looks like an NFL quarterback right now just from a build perspective, and I think he's going to be a hugely sought-after guy in the portal. He's really, really talented, and one of those guys that I understand benching him, don't necessarily disagree with that decision. I think some of the stuff that happened in the offseason around the O-line was just not very good. But outside of that, I think there are a number of things that, at the very least, teams are going to have to think about going forward. If you have a quarterback that knows the system, that's playing good football, you might have a guy that's more talented behind him, but the grass isn't always greener, even in your own program. So you got to be careful about these things, and Jackson Arnold kind of illustrated that this past weekend. And then you have an Avery Johnson led Kansas State team that just played bad football. Avery Johnson was not all that great in that game, and you're looking at that game and thinking, if Will Howard's in here, maybe he doesn't make that mistake, or maybe he just throws the ball a little bit more consistently and pushes the ball down the field. And I think he would have. I don't necessarily think Kansas State would have won that game because of all the things that went BYU's direction, but I don't want to say I know for a fact. I feel pretty good that Will Howard would have walked in and at least not lost by 29 points. I feel pretty good about that. So I do think it's one of those things that people got to make sure that they're right when they go into the portal, or make sure they're right when they, I don't want to say push someone out, but when they favor a younger guy over the older guy, because doesn't always work out. We saw it early on in the season, obviously, with OU. For Kansas State, they have a different situation because Avery Johnson is going to be their quarterback going forward, but definitely something they're going to be at least thinking about a little bit in those two places. Can we fix the Heisman this year is the next thing I want to talk about. And this is something that I've talked about, or I've thought about at least, throughout the beginning of the season. And I've kind of pushed up against for a little bit, but at this point, I'm done even pushing against it at all. Travis Hunter is the best player in this sport. There is no debate in my mind. He does incredible things every single time he's on that field. He has an effect on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and frankly, if they wanted to throw him out there on special teams, he'd be a difference maker there too. He is absolutely incredible, and I understand that this has become a quarterback award. This has become, if you have a 9-win team and you're an elite quarterback like Jaden Daniels was a year ago, you can win the Heisman. Congratulations. If you're anything else, you can't. That has to change. This Heisman is about giving it to the best player in the country. That is the best player in the country. I have no doubt in my mind. There is no waver in my voice because that kid is downright elite. If he keeps playing this level of football, which is a big if, and if he keeps playing every single week, which again is a big if because of the ridiculous amount of snaps that he's playing, but if all of that happens, he is the Heisman. I don't care if they're 6-6. I don't care if they're 5-7. This kid is as big of a difference maker as there is in the entire country. If he was wearing an Alabama jersey, he'd be far and away the Heisman leader right now. It's just because he's on a team that not a lot of people think is all that good. And frankly, I don't necessarily think they're all that good either. But I do think that this player is the best player in the country. And if we're doing the Heisman right, he would be the person that would get it at the end of the year. Granted, still has to play a lot of football. But as of right now, he is, I don't want to say far and away, but pretty comfortably my number one guy in the Heisman race. Another thing that people were talking about is, do I have an issue with people, with Colorado storming the field? No. Stop it. I understand people like to dunk on other fans and like to do that thing. That's ridiculous. These are kids that are having a good time. That is the end-all be-all of this situation. I understand they did jump the gun just a little bit there, and definitely that has to be fixed. But overall, this is what it's about. And I think Josh Pate probably made the argument the best, and I'm not trying to steal his take, but I very much agree with it. College football is different at different places. What happens in Athens, Georgia is going to be received differently than what happens in Boulder, Colorado. That's why a lot of UGA fans were saying this is ridiculous. We wouldn't storm the field for Baylor. You shouldn't. You're beating Baylor is not a big deal. A team that was 1-11 2 years ago that has built up an incredible product and has played really solid football the first couple of years and has gotten all of this fan involved, that's a big deal. And I understand that it was Baylor, but it was a crazy game. It was a lot of emotion, and frankly, I'd much prefer these fans storming the field with not a huge reason to storm the field than not showing up at all. Because a couple of years ago, it was hard to even get 50% of that stadium filled. So, no, I don't have a problem with them storming the field. I will likely never really have a problem with fans storming the field overall. I don't think it really matters. I don't think it reflects on the program at all because it's the kids making the decision. So, overall, I think it was one of those conversations that we probably don't have if it's not Colorado, if I'm being totally honest with you, but I don't understand the argument being against it. I probably never will, if I'm being totally honest. But the other thing to talk about is how much have conferences changed since week 0, because it's really hard to even start into this one because there are so many different ways that you could go at it. Weirdly, the Big Ten and the SEC have been a little bit more straightforward, although Indiana, Illinois, a lot of these teams have kind of thrown a little bit of wrench into that. But at the end of the day, the ACC and the Big 12 have been all over the place. When you talked about the teams coming in, at least from my mind, and I think a lot of people's mind coming in, SMU, NC State, Virginia Tech, they were all looking at them as possibly teams that could make a little bit of a run, be a little bit dangerous. All of them are very iffy right now, and I don't feel great about any of them. FSU is obviously just downright bad, and then you got a couple other teams. I think you have an FSU team that, nightmare. There's really no other way to put it. And then you have Boston College, Syracuse that are playing really good football right now and could kind of fill the void of that SMU, NC State, Virginia Tech teams that have just kind of fallen off a cliff. And then you look at the Big 12. I think it's just off the walls. I have a very hard time getting any beat on the Big 12 other than Utah is the best team in the conference. I feel pretty good about that right now, but Oklahoma State, I just think is not very good this year. I'll be totally honest. I think if they can't get that run game going, they have absolutely nothing going for them, plain and simple. And then KSU is going to be a huge question mark. BYU is playing incredibly good football, and I don't know if there was a soul on the planet that picked BYU to be 4-0 right about now. So they're probably the biggest surprise team in the country. They're probably the team that everyone's looking at right now and saying, BYU's 4-0. They're coming off a 29-point win at home against Kansas State. So I think the Big 12, we knew was going to be crazy. We knew it was going to be off the walls, but teams like BYU making a little bit of a run makes it all that more interesting and definitely has changed the way I look at that conference going forward. And it's definitely going to be an incredible thing to watch because I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. And then I wonder who has proved the most this week. Who was the team that really stood out, that did everything that you wanted them to do and kind of asserted themselves as possibly a title contender? I think it might start with Utah. What they did at Oklahoma State with a backup quarterback is one of the biggest games of the year. They got a huge win, and their defense played incredibly well, and Isaac Wilson, although it wasn't perfect by any means, made the plays that he needed to make. So I think Utah asserted to me that they're Utah. They haven't gone anywhere. They're not changing anything, and they're definitely a team that is going to have to be worried about in the Big 12 and likely is the pretty comfortable favorite right now, right up there with Iowa State. And then you got a couple other teams. I think Michigan and USC kind of both proved a point this past weekend. Michigan obviously proved the point that they're not going to shy away from the challenge. They are going to run the ball at you, and if you're ready to roll, then cool, you'll be able to stop it. If you're not, then we're going to get you for a couple of big runs, and we're going to win a gross one. That's the way that they're going to play football, and I think just asserted themselves as who they are. They didn't necessarily change too much. They didn't necessarily bounce around too much. What they did do is say, we're not going to be able to throw the ball. Let's just run the ball over and over and over again. At some point, our guys will make plays, and that's exactly what happened. And then on the other side, I think USC proved a point to me. They showed that they're a very physical team, a team that is not going to walk into Ann Arbor and just get pushed around, because that's what a lot of people thought was going to happen. Did not happen at all. I know USC obviously came on the wrong side of this, but overall, they missed a couple of big plays. That was really it. There were a couple of plays that if they make one tackle at the end of that game, it looks a lot different, and we're talking about them in totally different ways, so I'm not necessarily going to knock them too much. I think Miller Moss was a lot better than people are giving him credit for, and this team showed me that they're exactly who I expected, or not expected them to be, but they're exactly who I've seen the first couple of weeks, which is a much improved defensive team that is going to be plenty dangerous for pretty much anyone they play. And then you have an Illinois team that is plenty proving their point. They are definitely in on that conversation, and I think this weekend they proved that they're not going to shy away from any challenge. There was pretty much no one picking Illinois this last weekend other than Tom Fornelli, who is always going to pick Illinois. But overall, I think it was a really, really interesting weekend, and Illinois showed me that they're going to be able to compete for a CFP spot. I don't necessarily think they're going to get it, at least as of right now, but once you get to that Michigan game, it's one that definitely could go either way. And if they win that one, then they might just be a shoo-in for the playoff, honestly. And then you got a couple other teams. I think JMU obviously proved a lot, showed that they could very well be the Group of 5 rep, and frankly, I might like them the best out of the Group of 5 teams right now. Boise State obviously right there as well, and some couple other teams like Texas State and some others, but man, this JMU team can play, and they can put up points with really anyone in the country, and I think that might just be enough to get them to the playoffs. So a lot of teams that proved themselves, a lot of teams that showed that they're a title contender or showed that they're not quite as bad as we thought they were going to be, and some teams that just outright shocked me, like Illinois. But I think there's a number of things that are going to happen over the next couple of weeks. More than anything else, just watch Travis Hunter. It's going to be very fun for you, and frankly, it'll get a lot more people on my side, because the second you watch him on the football field, you will tell in a hurry that he is different than everyone else out there. But definitely something we will touch on throughout the rest of the season, and we'll see if he keeps that spot at the top of my Heisman rankings. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a Week 4 rip around, get to all of the games that we just didn't quite have a chance to get to yesterday, including a really interesting saga happening down there in Auburn, Alabama that we'll break down after this, so stick with us.